Congressman, let's dive into it here if you're good.
Sure.
You're on a 2-week recess. You're back in your district. I'm assuming you're going to be talking to your constituents.
Mm-hmm.
What are your top priorities to get done when you go back to D.C. at the end of this recess?
Well, this is priorities that I've had basically since I've been in Congress, and a lot of that is reform of government, as well as protecting the privacy and the pocketbooks of American citizens. We've seen a growth in government that is unfathomable over the past several years, and with that, we've seen a massive intrusion into the privacy of individuals. A lot of what I'm focused on in that area is in the financial services sector, and being on the Financial Services Committee, I've been made more aware of the intrusions into average Americans like we've never seen before. If you remember a few years ago, Nancy Pelosi proposed monitoring everyone's transactions of $600 or more, and people were rightly upset about that. But something similar has been going on for a long time. And in the 1970s, Congress passed the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, that was a way of going after illicit finance, terrorist financing and such. What it requires are banks to report any transaction over $10,000, any cash transaction $10,000, either a deposit or withdrawal.
Report that to
an organization known as FINRA. It is the law enforcement element of the financial services sector. And they keep that in a database. The issue is that has never been adjusted for inflation. So if you had adjusted, it'd be $80,000 today. So what's happened is we're overwhelming the system to where FINRA and law enforcement, they complain that it's like looking for a needle in the haystack.
They're getting too many reports.
Exactly, and they're less than 99% they're actually utilizing out of all that. But of course, the government, their default is, well, we need to take more info in. The issue is, how about reduce the size of the haystack? So I've got legislation that will change that. Not only raise that limit up to $30,000 to $80,000, whatever we can negotiate, but also index it to inflation so we don't have that problem. But you think about most businesses, they are reporting all this data that is sitting out in a database that the Chinese and the Russians would love to hack in a moment. And we've seen time and time again, the government is the weakest link in our cybersecurity system.
Do you worry about the vulnerability of the United States government to cyber attacks?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it happen time and time again from government systems. Some of the largest breaches in history have come out of the government.
That's going to be an alarming thing for somebody to hear a sitting congressman say.
Well, and if you think about it, it may not affect a lot of average customers, but it really has a major effect on the banks. Because especially your smaller banks, they're inundated with this cost of sending these reports. There are some banks that have 7 to 10, I'm talking about small banks, 7 to 10 compliance specialists, just to make sure they're complying with the regulation. Now you throw on top of that other data that the government has recently started collecting, and one of those is in the Security Exchange Commission. They created a database called the CAT, Consolidated Automatic Transactions Database. And what this is designed is that every stockbroker has to report every stock transaction and all the details, including the personal identifiable information of the person making the stock transaction. So in the past, that didn't really affect a lot of blue-collar workers. Well, ever since the apps such as Robinhood, you've got TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, they all have individual apps where you can buy and sell stocks as low as a quarter of a share of Apple, right?
Now more people are invested.
And all of their information, unknowingly, is being reported to this database. I even had the director of the Security Exchange Commission, Gensler, in a hearing. And I've been challenging this on a Fourth and Fifth Amendment constitutional basis, because the government is, let's give an illustration. If the sheriff here in Bartow County suspected me of doing some kind of financial crime or any crime, they wanted to go look at my financial records, and he walked into my bank and told the banker, hey, I want all of his records, they're going to say, show me your search warrant. But that's not the case in the Consolidated Audit Trail. The Chairman Gensler told me, he said, we're going to just be perusing, looking for someone possibly doing something wrong. And that's a violation of privacy, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And so I've actually, with the Trump administration, they've already put a pause on the consolidated audit trail. And we've got legislation that would actually change that to where at least the PII is not being collected off individuals. So there's a lot of things like that. And the other is government reform, which is, as the DOGE committee has been looking at.
I'm glad you get to that. I wanted to ask you about that because as soon as my first question, you talked about your priorities and you pointed to reforming and resizing the federal government. Obviously, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, has made a lot of headlines recently. We have seen major announcements of cuts across a bevy of federal agencies, including the Atlanta-based CDC, the Veterans Affairs Department. Are you supportive of these DOGE cuts?
Well, yes, and it depends on the way they're doing it too, because one thing I think the administration found out, something I've been working on for 6 years, they can't fire a lot of these people. And this was brought to my attention by President Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson. My first year in Congress, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. We're having a hearing. He's testifying before us, and I see a line item in their budget that confused me. It's like $385 million. So I asked him, Mr. Secretary, what is this $385 million? It doesn't make sense. He said, Congressman, I'm actually glad you asked that question. That's how much money we paid Homeland Security employees to stay at home and not come to work. He said most of these have had some kind of disciplinary action and they lost their security clearance, which means they can't even come into the office. But it takes at minimum a year to get somebody off the payroll, to actually fire somebody. It takes a year in the federal government. And he said if they know how to game the system, which they all do, then they can protest, they can appeal to the Merit System Protection Board and get another year. So a lot of these people are on their second year with full pay and benefits. And so we started looking deeper into it and found that this is going on across the country. And so I started working on reforms to that. And we have a bill called the Merit Act. And the Senate has a companion bill that they're working on as well that's modeled after our legislation. And I actually introduced it during the first Trump administration. And was working with the White House on this, and they decided that they said the president actually wants to poll federal workers and see what they think about it, which at the time I thought was a crazy idea, right? You're going to poll federal workers to make it easier to fire them, because what the Merit Act does is basically bring industry standard. I mean, you get 30 days instead of a year. You know, if you're a bad employee, you're not coming to work. You've violated some ethics laws, or you've committed a felony. You've got 30 days, and then you got a 30-day appeal. That's it, instead of this 2 years. And so he went ahead and polled the federal workers and came back that 2/3 of federal workers supported the legislation.
That would make it easier to remove somebody from a workplace, a federal workplace, who was causing problems.
Right, because the default way of getting rid of a bad employee was to promote them. If a manager had somebody causing problem, it was so difficult, and it's still so difficult, to actually get rid of that bad employee, which could be a cancer on the entire organization. They just promote them. And there's been instances of these people getting promoted until they're mid-level managers. I encountered one of those when I was on the Space and Science and Technology Committee, where we were investigating a data leak from an agency. And it turned out that it was just incompetence by their chief information officer. And as we started looking into it, he had gone from organization to organization, and he had problems at every organization.
Somebody who had been failing upward. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who hear you say that, they're going to think, yeah, this makes total sense. We, the taxpayer, we don't want somebody who is failing upward to be being supported by our taxpayer dollars. Some people may also ask, though, you talk about some folks who are bad apples, who are not carrying their weight in the federal workforce. When you compare those folks to the scope of the cuts proposed by DOGE, you talk about 70,000, 80,000 people who may be on the chopping block inside the VA. That's about a quarter of their overall workforce. I can't imagine that many folks inside the VA are bad apples.
Well, there's been a history within the VA of that happening, and I've got a lot of confidence in our new VA secretary. He and I are not only close friends, but he was a great legislator and a veteran as well as I am. But you have to look at it from an efficiency standpoint. And that's something that the federal government hasn't done before. Looking at everything from what is the value you're getting out of the dollar. Look, one thing about Washington, D.C., they love the status quo. Whether it's working or not, they love the status quo. I go back to when I first got in the state legislature back in 2005. Education reform was the biggest deal. I mean, that was what had driven people to run for office for years. And as a business owner here, I remember education reform. We have to get ourselves out of the basement in education. So when I get to the House of Representatives in the state, we start looking at education reform. I go to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and I'm like, we can work together on this. And one of them told me, he said, quite frankly, we don't want to fix it. I'm like, why? He said, what would we campaign on? I mean, that was maybe a little tongue in cheek, but it really showed you can campaign on some things, but when it comes down to getting it done, do they really want to get it done? And Washington, D.C. becomes comfortable with the status quo. And when you look at the size of our federal government, it has seen massive growth over the years. A high percentage of people are employed by the federal government. And so you have to look at it from two different areas. One, yeah, you're providing someone employment, but also the taxpayers are paying for that person. And is it something that 5 people can do or one person could actually do that job? So they're looking at it from maybe a corporate standpoint. Is we have to have efficiency. And that's something else, a piece of legislation that we actually got out of the Senate recently, a piece of legislation that I worked on that actually started several years ago, there was no customer service standards within the federal government at the agencies. And so we wrote legislation to actually put in some level of review that these agencies have to review their customer service. What is the customer's experience? Now, during the first Trump administration, the VA started doing this. They actually hired a team of folks to look at what is the experience of the veteran from when they raise their hand and take the oath of office until they're buried at a national cemetery. That's the way the VA should be looking at the veterans. The problem is, and I met with these folks several times, they said the problem we have with the Veterans Administration are people are agency focused, not veteran focused. What's in the best interest of the agency? That's what really drives everything. One illustration of cuts isn't in personnel, but in dollars. Recently, they've uncovered that there was a contract for IT support, basically web design, that was in the millions of dollars. And basically all this company was doing was updating the website once a month.
It sounds like you're concerned, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to ask you one other topic-related question, but to close the loop here, to make sure I'm understanding you and anybody who's watching is hearing you correctly, it sounds like when we drill down to it, your real concerns are twofold. One is about making it easier for employees who are flagged as problem employees to be cycled out of the federal workforce. And in this other bucket is a concern about general efficiency. So you're worried about probably, some people, they're doing their jobs and they're doing the jobs as assigned, but in your view, it's not an efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Is that an accurate summation?
Right. I mean, you look at it from in the private sector, you may have one person doing a particular job that in the government sector you have 5 or 10. And it depends on the different agencies. And so that's why I think they're taking a larger look at this and trying to bring some efficiency in, because it is taxpayer dollars. And we can't continue down the path that we're on. We are going broke as a nation.
You worry about the national debt?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's overwhelming when you look at it.
Let's talk about a major expense of the United States, and it's been a topic that has been in the news a lot recently, and that's Medicare and Medicaid. Very expensive programs on the federal budget. Also programs that lots and lots of people across the country and here in Georgia rely on for major health care needs. There have been questions about the future of those programs, so I want to put this question to you flat out, because I know a lot of people will be curious to hear your response. Will you ever cast a vote that would reduce access to Medicare or Medicaid programs?
Not to the people that they are designed to go to.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that there's a lot of fraud. We know there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of abuse within the system. And you're talking about Medicaid, that's something that's state controlled, but yet federally funded, right? And so you have instances where states are not monitoring who's getting the the aid, who's actually getting the support out of that. And so we need to have the states drill down and make sure that they're qualifying everybody that's receiving that support. And so that's why you have to qualify the statement is, I never want to cut it for those who need it. That's a program that is there, and it disenfranchises those who actually need that level of help when you have people that are abusing it. And so, and the president has made that clear to Congress, is during this budget and reconciliation process we're in, is that we're not going to cut the services. We're going to get rid of fraud, abuse. We're also going to look at instances such as the contract I talked about with VA, where you've got outside firms that are abusing the process. You know, is there ways we can save money and get more efficiency?
How do you figure that out? How do you parse it out in a program that large with so many entities and so many people impacted? I can imagine there may be some folks who hear your answer and think they may be a little unsettled to hear that your answer was not a flat no, I'll never vote to ratchet back these programs.
Well, it's because when you look at it, if people are receiving it that shouldn't, then we need to cut that, right? But we're not going to cut the services to those who actually qualify and who need it. And so when you look at especially Medicaid, there's things that Congress can do, and this is what we'll be doing in that reconciliation process. So what we passed just the other day was a budget. That is the step one. So the Senate and House agreed to a budget number. In the next 10 years, we're going to cut $2 trillion. It's really a drop in the bucket when you look at our deficit and our debt right now, but it's a good start. What happens then in the House is that $2 trillion is broken up into committees of jurisdiction. And the committees, each committee is given the responsibility of finding a certain dollar value of cuts. On Financial Services Committee, I think we have $800 billion that we have to find within the financial services sector, the government regulation part of it. And so there's some areas that we can consolidate. We have a lot of agencies that are, they're all doing the same thing, right? And from different angles. And you can talk to bankers, and they'll tell you, well, if I'm in compliance with one, I'm out of compliance with another. And there's some that we have to do reports for that have nothing to do with our banking. We can save a lot of money doing things like that. The Energy and Commerce Committee has a responsibility over healthcare. And so they're going to be looking at where, of our portion of this, where are we going to find those cuts? It's not necessarily going to come out of any service, but they are going to look for fraud, abuse, better efficiency. And we're not talking about flipping the switch off tomorrow. We're talking about over a 10-year period. How are we going to start this path? What can we do? And one of the things we can do is require the states to pay more attention, to clean up their roles, to actually qualify people, to make sure that those that actually need Medicaid are getting Medicaid, and those that don't need it, they're not.
Congressman, I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
My pleasure. All right.
Appreciate it.